Hey, well, what's up, guys? Welcome back to The Collision. Daniel here to talk about the latest film by the legendary director Martin Scorsese, Killers of the Flower Moon. I've seen it, so let's talk about it. So it seems like in recent years, director Martin Scorsese is almost most in the news for making headlines for provocative and kind of disparaging statements towards comic book superhero movies and just really modern blockbusters. But I think with this film, he kind of reminds audiences that he's more than just a grumpy old man shaking his fist at the clouds, that he really is a living legend, one of the great directors that we still have with us. And I will say for this movie, Killers of the Flower Moon, it is definitely not always an easy movie to watch. This is a very challenging, a very demanding movie, but I do think it is also sort of an emphatic statement of sort of a thesis for Scorsese that cinema can be more than just sort of popcorn munching diversion and entertainment and spectacle, that it can wrestle with very weighty themes and kind of elevate different concepts and challenge viewers rather than just trying to sort of satisfy their wants. And really to that end, I appreciated this movie. I don't know necessarily how much I enjoyed this movie from a certain perspective, but this is a masterfully crafted movie. This is a well-made story that very much knows the story it's trying to tell, and sort of everything is in service to that. Just the runtime, the acting, the focuses of the story, and it is almost relentlessly grim. This is a very somber story, but it is also a challenging one. It is a story that I think as a Christian, there's a lot to chew on as it really kind of shines the light on just sort of greed and the destructive kind of wages of sin. And I did appreciate the irony of the fact that before I saw this movie, the previews that played before the movie were just sort of a endless string of upcoming flashy, spectacle-driven superhero movies, the kind of films that I think Scorsese famously kind of deemed like theme park rides. And I don't think he was meaning that to say that they're not without value, just that they exist to sort of exhilarate and entertain and a little more hollow. And like I said, I think this movie is very much doing something different from that. It is not trying to be entertaining necessarily. And I don't think this is a movie that I would consider entertaining, which doesn't mean that it's boring. This is a movie that, despite a very, very, very long runtime, it is consistently captivating. It is engrossing. I never felt bored, although I did feel a little antsy in my seat. But it's not a movie that aims necessarily to please audiences. Maybe another way I would say it is this is a movie that gives audiences what Scorsese thinks they need to see, rather than maybe what they want to experience. Because Killers of the Flower Moon really slowly breaks viewers down over the course of this over 3.5 hour runtime. Like I said, it is a difficult movie to watch at times. It's not an inspirational story. It's not a kind of a feel-good story. Even viewers, if you're hoping for sort of at least some closure and some satisfaction, some feel-good emotions to leave the theater with in the end, don't hold your breath. This movie is from start to finish is just a very grim story that just sort of is a meditation, just heartache and evil and depravity. As someone that is very outspoken about the fact that I hate long run times, I've often said I don't think any movie deserves to be over 2 hours. That being said, I think this is a movie, you definitely feel the length, and it probably is about 30 minutes too long, but it maybe is one of those examples of kind of rare cases where sort of the fatigue of the audience actually is an effective sort of storytelling mechanic, because the story, it is given a lot of room to breathe, a lot of room to develop. Scorsese, I think, wisely resists the temptation to just reduce this movie to a bunch of sort of bombastic action and thriller, and sort of like I think some of the trailers for this movie sort of give you an idea of what that kind of movie could be, and it's just real exciting, and you sort of go along for the ride. The actual movie, the 3.5 hour version of that, definitely doesn't do it. It very much takes its time. It allows sort of the the corruption and the descent into sin and greed. It allows audiences to sort of see like a slow motion train wreck. You see that happening. You sort of live with those characters in the community. You're not just sort of jumping from one action scene or big moment to the next. You're just immersed in this, and sort of sporadically you're confronted with sort of grisly images and just sort of evil acts that happen. And really, by the end of this movie, it's exhausting. I felt tired when I left this movie. You sort of keep waiting and hoping that Scorsese will like take his foot off the throttle and give you a little bit of hope to get you through for such a long movie, and he really never does. And I think the exhausting nature of sort of that experience is the point. And kind of without like the big bombastic action or set pieces, this movie very much relies on like dramatic acting to carry it through and to keep audiences engaged throughout the runtime. And the expansive cast in this is more than up to the challenge. Kind of Scorsese mainstays Leo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro, who've been in a bunch of his previous movies. They're both excellent in this movie as well, both playing essentially the antagonists of this movie, although they are the main characters in the story, which is a risk. It's to center your movie on essentially the villains of this story. And I do think it's a testament to their skill as actors that they're able to pull that off and keep audiences engaged despite the fact that they're both essentially very unlikable and evil characters. But the film's sort of standout performance, although all the acting is great, the best performance by far is Lily Gladstone, who plays Molly, who's sort of the wife of DiCaprio's character. And I have no doubt that her name is going to be featured prominently when the award season comes around and the Academy Awards. And she is definitely, her performance is worthy of being a part, maybe even a front runner in that discussion, because she is the beating heart of this film. And she is really one of the few kind of truly good characters that, as the audience, you're rooting for her. You're feeling sort of the pain of her tragedy, as she is sort of this innocent sheep and sort of the wolves are closing in around her. And even like her character's sort of slow deterioration, like physically and emotionally throughout this film, sort of what she looks like and is in her opening scene to how she is near the end of it, is, once her grief and pain has really just chipped away at her, becomes a very kind of potent metaphor and imagery that sort of symbolizes the whole message of this film. As far as content to consider, there is some stuff, although I think it's appropriate the way that it's used, and maybe not as much as you might expect from a Scorsese movie and an R-rated movie. Language, there's one, maybe two F-bombs, and then maybe about a dozen other kind of mild profanities and at least a couple sort of uses of God's name, as well as there's kind of all throughout, there's instances of sort of derogatory terms aimed at various groups of people that are consistent with the time period of the show, but those are in there as well. As far as violence, there is violence, and it is occasionally quite gruesome, although personally I don't think it's ever kind of sensationalized. I think it's appropriately vile and heinous rather than being sort of reduced to spectacle or to stimulate in any way, because several characters get shot either through the chest or through the head, and you see splatters of blood when that happens. One corpse is discovered of a murdered woman that ultimately we find out has been shot, and sort of from that, the doctors take her out, take the body, and sort of immediately start like carving into her skull, into her head, allegedly looking for the bullet. And you see the start of that, although you don't see a whole lot of that. And then it's later implied that they've also like flayed the skin and cut the body into pieces. And although you don't see the aftermath in that way, there's also a scene where an explosion happens in a house, and all the characters in the house are either killed or bloodied in very somewhat grotesque ways. The worst of it is there's the lady that suffers from this. They find her dead body, and as they sort of lift it up, the body up, like the back half of her, or part of her head, is sort of flaps down, and it is gory, although it's not on screen very long. And in that same kind of scene or set, they also find like the disfigured hand of one of the other characters that's bloodied, and they comment that the investigators have been finding pieces of her still all throughout the wreckage. So definitely violent, although I think appropriately violent and not over the top in that way, but brace yourself for that. And it's also maybe one of the things it is mentioned that one of the women that has been murdered was allegedly pregnant, so that is also horrifying as well. First, sexuality. There is no sexuality. There's talk of it. Characters talk about sort of their sexual conquest, and one character, Leo DiCaprio's character, confesses that he's greedy in his regarding like his desire for a woman, and there's some banter back and forth, or a character accuses a woman of like being way too flippant easy about opening her legs, and they argue about that, and he sort of makes crude comments to another woman and sort of gestures, kind of grabs her around the belly, and so there's a little bit of that. And then a husband and wife are shown like in bed, and they're kissing, and he jokes that she's trying to wake the kids, but you don't actually see any like the sexual activity that happens on screen. Maybe just one other as far as content goes, is spirituality, because that plays a pretty prominent role all throughout this. There are several scenes that depict kind of the Osage people, sort of the Native American people, that their own spirituality, their own religion. There's a sort of a repeated motif where characters, women that are dying, are visited by this owl, and that's supposed to represent that they're near death, although whether that is like a spiritual vision or just a hallucination is never made clear. Although there is one scene that sort of similar to that, where a character that dies, a woman, she sort of wakes up in sort of a dreamlike sequence where she sees like her ancestors, and they kind of get her out of the bed and walk off, allegedly or assumedly, to like the afterlife or sort of whatever that represents. So there is very much some of that kind of Native American religion and spirituality. And at the same time, that religion and kind of spirituality is also very much kind of intermingled with Catholicism. Molly, who is Gladstone's character, confesses to be a Catholic, and you see her attending church services, and it said that she's sort of confessing her concerns and her fears to the priest. And even a lot of the other like Osage people will, while still practicing some of their own kind of spirituality, they also talk about like, the Lord, and it seems like they've very much sort of taken the Catholic religion in their own and have some sort of joint accommodation of the two of those together. So you do get a lot of sort of biblical or Catholic allusions throughout the movie, and even some of the like the villainous characters are quote scripture and they're shown praying, although as the audience you know that is very much kind of hypocrisy and sort of an empty false religion. As far as themes, kind of things going on beneath the surface of this movie, there were two biblical verses that came to mind that very much are relevant to sort of the theme that Scorsese is trying to unpack in this film. And that is 1 Timothy 6:10, for the love of money is the root of all evil. And then also Romans 6:23, where it says, for the wages of sin is death. And this movie is very much a non-sugar-coated version or exploration of those verses. It's sort of a somber cautionary tale of how greed leads to sin and how sin ultimately leads to death, both in a very literal sense, but also in a bit more of like a figurative sense of sort of a death of the community, death of joy, death of marriages. So you definitely have kind of those verses informing this story. And like I said, one of the advantages of having such a long movie is that Scorsese is able to depict sort of that slow, almost unassumed descent into sin of DiCaprio's character, whose name in the movie is Ernest, because he's very much not like a classic anti-hero, because there's way too much blood on his hands for him to be considered, a hero or have heroism. But kind of unlike De Niro's his uncle, he's at least a conflicted antagonist. It doesn't seem like he's fully evil, or at least that he's intentional in his descent into evil, because his first sort of on-screen crime or evil deeds is just a simple robbery, just to take some jewels so they can use it for cards. And kind of that, you sort of, as the audience, you see that love of money just take root in his life. At one point, he declares to one of his friends, says, "I love money almost as much as my own wife." And that declaration very much gets put to the test as he increasingly gets involved in kind of more evil, more awful deeds, with a lot more serious consequences, and starting to scheme and murder. And And sort of those consequences that at first he's able to keep at a distance and just enjoy the financial gain that he gets from being a part of that. Slowly, kind of over throughout the movie, those consequences come closer and closer to home, to where his own family, his wife, and his kids are threatened. And kind of despite the fact that he is very much, I think, a morally bankrupt character, it is clear that he does love his wife, he does love his kids, and you do see him kind of become more and more entangled in his greed to the point where his own family and life begins to suffer from it. Because maybe another verse, Matthew 6:24, where it says, you can't serve two masters, you can't serve God and money. You at least initially see Ernest's character, he confesses to be a Catholic, and when Molly says you don't attend church, you see him attending church, and there's at least a promising start that maybe he has the choice to go on the right path. But he's just simply a character that seems like he can never make the right choice, that he is completely in bondage to greed above all things. And there's a very sort of symbolic scene in this where he's in a room, and there's a podium with like a Bible on it, and they have to remove the Bible in order for him to lean against it and sort of get justice from his uncle for messing up on some of their schemes. And it does seem to be this sort of symbolic picture that his character has sort of chosen to align with with man and the justice of man, rather than sort of kneeling and standing for the justice, like the holy justice of God. And kind of in that way, this movie doesn't offer a whole lot of hope, a whole lot of solutions for sort of our, for greed and for sin. There is no sort of third act Christian conversion, or, the characters that are treated unjustly never do get real justice, at least not on this earth. But I do think kind of by dwelling so clearly and so fixed on just sort of the depravity of man and the wages of sin, I think this movie ultimately does point towards the need of a savior, the wretchedness of our condition, the needs for rescue from beyond. So in the end, like I said, I think this is a really good movie. I think it's a difficult movie. It's a movie that I don't think everyone's going to enjoy, or that everyone maybe even should watch. But it is the kind of movie that I'm glad there are. I'm glad that there are movies that can challenge and that can wrestle with this deeper, weightier themes and make you uncomfortable, make you physically uncomfortable from sitting through it, and just sort of thematically just challenging you, confronting you with the nakedness of what real sin and evil look like. I think this is a film that focuses on a very tragic real life evil in our history as a country, but also reminds audiences that same evil resides in the hearts of all people. So I would say I don't know if I necessarily enjoyed this movie, but I did appreciate what it had to offer. But hey, let me know what you guys think. If you guys make it through this movie, if you guys go see it, or else if you're watching this later when it hits Apple streaming, I would love to have a conversation. I do think there's a lot to talk about in this movie, and whether you think it was effective to expose evil, or whether you were missing some degree of hope or light, at least somewhere sprinkled in this film. Would love to have that conversation with you. So jump in the comment section, share your thoughts. And also, if you haven't done so, I encourage you guys, subscribe to our channel, become a Collider. Just join with what we're doing here. Get lots of movie reviews and TV reviews and live streams. I would love to have you be a part of that. But most of all, guys, thanks for watching. Stay safe and continue to collide through World for Christ.